Welcome, everyone, to this webinar on the intersection of mental health and Judaism. My name is Ben Winton, and I'm a senior peer support worker at Jami. For those of you who don't know, Jami is a UK Jewish charity seeking to improve the quality of life of those impacted by mental illness and distress in the Jewish community and beyond. This event is part of Jami's program put on for this weekend's Mental Health Awareness Shabbat. Launched 6 years ago, Mental Health Awareness Shabbat aims to raise the profile of mental health in the Jewish community and a place to reflect on how we can be more inclusive and facilitate the recovery of those suffering from mental distress. To guide us through tonight's topic, it is an honor that we are joined by Rabbi Yoni Rosensweig. Rabbi Yoni is the co-author of a groundbreaking Hebrew publication on the interplay of Jewish law and mental illness, and a founder of Maglei Nefesh, the Center for Mental Health, Community, and Halakha in Israel. So Rabbi Yoni, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
To give participants a roadmap of what we're going to do, we have about 40 minutes of discussion. We're going to be doing it in two parts. One part will be focusing on Jewish law or halakha and its intersection with mental health. And the second part will be looking more widely at Judaism as a wider religious and cultural enterprise and its interaction with mental health. Then we'll have about 15 minutes for questions submitted from the audience, and then a short conclusion, and I will show people some resources for signposting in case you or people you know have concerns around getting support for mental health. So let's jump straight in. Rav Yoni, since this topic is about Jewish law and mental illness, I thought that for those who really are starting from the beginning, you could give just a quick intro to what halakha or Jewish law is.
Sure. So I think it's a very important question for our topic, obviously. And I'll just give like a little bit of a taste to understand. Jewish law is very involved in the minutia of everyday living, and understanding that is a key over here, because, and this is not, I'm not trying to compare in a way that is derogatory in any way, but the difference between for Christianity and Judaism, for example, is that Christianity has very few laws, if any. They have rituals, they have all kinds of ceremonies that they go through, certainly. And those, of course, they treasure and are very important to them, and I'm not taking away from that. But when I was sitting with some ministers, I think it was about 3-4 years ago, and I mentioned to them some of the dilemmas that I have, they said, we have nothing like that. Like, we have no sort of comparison, within Christianity. So when we think about Christianity, we think about, like I said, ritual ceremonies. Jewish law has laws, and the laws are all encompassing. They encompass, the behaviors between you and God, between you and your fellow man, between you and yourself. They theoretically, one could build an entire society with such laws, meaning you wouldn't even need a secular law. That's how all-encompassing they are. And because of that, and this is the last thing I'll say, because of that, it's so important when we talk about mental health to understand how an Orthodox person is affected by the existence of those laws within his life. It's all encompassing, it's everywhere. So obviously they would need to figure out how to navigate that with their good mental health.
Thank you very much. And it just emphasizes the importance of having a coda or a place for exploring these questions and how anxiety-provoking it can be for people who feel obligated by these laws to have uncharted terrain, and to help charter it is really important. And I think that even for those who do not feel that sense of obligation, there are ricochet and echo effects going out to the wider Jewish community from these laws.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to talk to you about your book a little bit. And the first thing that struck me was the title, Nafshi B'She'elati, which I found surprisingly difficult to translate. So I was wondering if you could tell me, how would you translate it and what is it referencing?
Right. So your difficulty is very much understood, and I'll explain why. Because Nafshi B'She'elati is part of a pasuk, part of a verse from Megillat Esther, which we read on Purim. And it's basically part of Esther's plea where she says, Nafshi b'she'elati ve'ami b'bakashati. I'm putting my soul, in a sense, into my question, into my request from Achashverosh, from the king, the Persian king, that he should save the Jewish people. And ami b'bakashati, my people are in my request. But here, there is a play on words in Hebrew that doesn't necessarily translate into English. Because in Hebrew, the word nefesh can mean soul, and it can also mean mental health. Briut hanefesh, we say, when we say mental health. So nefesh could mean the mind, it could mean the soul. So nafshi b'she'elati, she's probably referring to her soul. She's probably referring more to her being, in a deep spiritual sense. But basically, because the book is about questions, she'elah, questions about the nefesh, so nafshi b'she'elati was an adequate title. To translate that into English, obviously loses the double meaning of nafshi, and therefore is a problem, a little bit of a complicated translation.
Thank you. Yeah, my first pass at it was something like my soul's plea, but whoever will translate your book into English has that challenge ahead of them. So take me through a case that you bring up in your book. I'm interested in what the factors are that determine how you give guidance in such cases. Anything that interests you. I was thinking either journaling or listening to music on Shabbat, or honoring your parents when you've had difficulties with them.
Sure. Let's talk about music on Shabbat because it's a very good example from many perspectives. So let's just talk that out. Okay. First of all, it's a great example because it's one of the most common questions that I get. People with depression, with anxiety, with eating disorders, borderline personality disorder, they will many times need something to keep them grounded during the week. And on Shabbat, that doesn't change. If anything, Shabbat is sometimes worse for people with mental health challenges, and they definitely need a coping mechanism of sorts. So listening to music for them could be very, very significant. I once was called, I think it was like 4 years ago, a woman called me, and she was asking me about what to do on Shabbat, with her condition, depression and other things, and I said, what do you do during the week? She said, well, during the week, I take a hot shower, or alternatively, I listen to music, but I can't do those things on Shabbat. So because I can't do those things on Shabbat, what am I going to do, right? So therefore, so I asked her, it was interesting, I asked her, before I answer you, what have you been doing on Shabbat in order to cope? So she said to me, I've been either inducing vomiting or cutting in a non-suicidal fashion. So what that showed me was, there's no vacuum. No one's waiting for me to paskin. No one's waiting for me to come up with a solution. They will have to cope in one way or another. I can help them cope in a healthy way, or they can cope in an unhealthy way. What was going on over there was obviously unhealthy, right? But there is a question, right, that we need to answer. So what's the answer for that question? So let me quickly just say what the answer would be in that situation. I could tell her to just use the phone and listen to music, put on Spotify, YouTube, whatever she wants to use. But I actually prefer not to say that. I actually prefer to say to her, here's what you should do. You should take your phone. You should make a playlist before Shabbat. You should basically put it on a loop, okay? And play it from before Shabbat if you can, so that it's continuous. And that way you don't have to press anything on Shabbat. Now, why is that a better answer? You might think, oh, technically, I don't want people to violate Shabbat. That is true, but it's not the real answer. The reason why that's such an important answer is because it conserves the sense of balance that people need between their mental health and their spiritual commitments. So just a word on that, and then I'll turn it back to you. But just a word on that. We always talk about balance within mental health. Okay, right? Even when we talk about what we say, how is that person doing? Right? They're balanced. If they're balanced, that's a good thing, right? That's what we say, because mental health is could be like a roller coaster sometimes, and people could be very, very unhinged. But if they're balanced, that's positive. It doesn't mean it won't come back. They could still fall into a depression or have anxiety or panic attacks or whatever it is. But right now they're balanced. It's a positive thing. It's the same thing with regards to mental health and halacha, mental health and Judaism. When a person is Orthodox or when they keep Jewish law, that's part of who they are. We shouldn't just look at that and say, oh, that's separate to you. Like, once again, imagine any religion. If I told a Muslim that he had to give up his beliefs in order to care for his mental health, or a Christian that he had to give up his beliefs in order to that would be like tearing off a limb for them. They would have to give up an entire piece of their personality. The thing that Jewish law is a technicality for an Orthodox person is incorrect. I think many of your listeners will probably be able to identify with the example of a Yom Kippur. For example, everybody keeps Yom Kippur, even non-religious people. Many times keep Yom Kippur. It's the one thing that they do many, many times. And to tell someone not to fast on Yom Kippur, of course I do that. If I need to, I do that. But it's not easy to hear. When I tell young women with anorexia, that they should not fast on Yom Kippur because of their eating disorder, that's hard to hear. They fight back. Are you sure? Maybe we can fast. Maybe we can do it. Are you sure you understood the question, et cetera, et cetera? It feels like I've disconnected them from the Jewish people. It feels like I've cut them off. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
For them, I'll just finish the point. So for them, it's just like impossible. What they need is to feel that balance. They need to feel not that I'm just caring for their mental health, but also that I'm still keeping them within the fold, keeping them connected to their Judaism. That's so important.
It really resonates with me. I think that at a time when I was very unwell and hospitalized, I was given guidance that allowed me to break Shabbat, but actually having the music for this person play from before until afterwards, which is kind of in accordance with how Orthodox Jews or those who keep halacha treats lights and various other things, feels like you're bringing Shabbat in some way. And there's this sense, I'm thinking of the quota from Achad Ha'am, which is more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. I think it felt like it applied to me as an individual. Shabbat helped keep me in check in some way and felt connected to me. So finding a way for these people who care so much about it to keep it feels valuable.
Absolutely.
So it is well attested that Jewish practice can enable some unhealthy obsessions and compulsions, more commonly in ultra-Orthodox communities, but maybe we'll talk also about in non-Orthodox communities too. But the classic examples are around repeating prayers and getting the intention just right, or the blessings, or washing hands. So what I was thinking about was whether this is something that we need to accept. Do we have to accept that some people are going to mentally suffer in part due to Judaism's laws? One more thing on that. I came across Maimonides' idea in his Guide to the Perplexed, where he says that the Torah aims at bettering the majority of people, and he kind of tacitly admits that it may make a minority worse off in some ways. And it just left me feeling like there are going to be people who suffer for trying to keep things. And I wondered what you felt about that. Is that something that we have to accept?
That's such an important question, and very, very deep. So if you'll just allow me, I will give you a bit of a long answer in order to really understand what that's about. So let me go to that Maimonides that you just mentioned, okay? Because it's of great significance. The Torah, we believe, was divinely given, but we also need to understand that while it was divinely given, it was given to human beings, and we are flawed, all of us. So as a result of that, it is only natural that when we take the Torah, we try to apply it to real life circumstance, there will be those who suffer. Yes, 100%. It's a very brave thing of Maimonides to say, but it's such an important truth, because we see many times that people are keeping halacha and they suffer as a result of it. They suffer as a result of their keeping of the law. You might say, but how could that be? Isn't the law supposed to be good? And the answer is the law is supposed to be good, yes. But there will always be a minority that will suffer as a result of the law because we many times do not know how to apply it, or because we twist it, or because we misunderstand it. There could be all kinds of reasons. When I see what this is a different topic, when I see what some husbands do to their wives, when they're not willing to give a get, they're not willing to give them a divorce, right? That is obviously a twisting of the law. They have used the law in order to blackmail their wives. They have used the law in order to, cause inequality and obviously a lack of ethics. Is that it's not the fault of the law; it's the fault of the human being who's using the law in a certain way. But what does that mean? And here's an important point. What that means is that it's up to us. I'm talking about me, the rabbis, and my colleagues to fix that. In other words, can people misuse laws? Just like they can misuse secular law, they can misuse religious law. Both of those things are possible to do, without a doubt, which is why we have, me and my colleagues, we have the responsibility to make sure that such unethical behavior does not persist, and therefore we have to help. So what happens, let's take now back to our topic. So when it comes to mental health, yes, absolutely. Someone with poor mental health is bound to suffer due to some of the religious laws. But that doesn't mean that we just leave it that way. That only means that now I have a duty, a responsibility to make sure that that person can get by, that there are ways for him to be able to survive under those circumstances, right? So with OCD, which is what you mentioned before as an example, right? When someone is repeating things all the time, washing their hands, constantly, etc., because he thinks that that's, a religious obligation, right? So instead of us, which definitely has happened and does happen, instead of me coming to the person who's saying Shema Yisrael for the 100th time, instead of me saying to them, "Oh, good job! Wow, you're such a tzaddik, you're such a pious person. You're not going to move until you say it with just the right kavanah, just the right intent, etc." That's terrible to try and encourage that sort of behavior. We need to do the opposite, right? We need to come and say, "Wait, you need to stop. That's not for you. That's not what you should be doing." And explain to the person, or not explain, just to tell him, that this is not the way that is right, for him to do. So all that is coming to say, yes, you're absolutely right. There will be such effects. That is on us. The onus is on us, on the rabbis, to then come and take the edge off whatever's going on.
The aim is to minimize that minority. This is an imperfect world, and there will be people who do suffer from them, but your aim is to minimize the number.
Precisely.
Of people.
Precisely.
Okay. Do you think it's as simple as ruling? I guess there were two different types of rulings. There's giving guidance to the individual person, and then there's giving responsa that some rabbis do for questions that kind of can be taken either by any Jew or by their community. Do you think that this relates to the debate about how rabbis rule and whether they rule more leniently or more stringently? I'm thinking of the example about preparing for Pesach, or which is Passover, where the Jews celebrate the Exodus from Egypt, or also commemorate that they were slaves in Egypt. And preparing for Passover can be very arduous and very difficult. And you'll see in Israel and some kibbutzim that they'll get a hose and hose the ceiling of the place. And people take this to in very different ways. Also keeping kosher lePesach, keeping a specific type of kosher for Passover, where you're not supposed to have leavened bread, and there are some people who won't expose their matzah to the air in case it gets sufficiently oxidized. So do you think this question about being lenient and saying, no, your matzah can be exposed to the air is related to the question around protecting a minority of people and their mental well-being?
I think that for sure, there's a lot there, right, that we have to focus on. So let me break it down once again, and it'll be a little bit of a long answer. I hope that's okay. So when I first started writing my book, so I came to mental health professionals to ask for their input. So I would come to a psychologist or a social worker, and I would say, so what do you think about music on Shabbat, right? If someone comes to me with depression, and they say they need music, do you think I should allow it? Do they need it? Do they not need it? And without fail, every mental health professional that I went to would say the same thing at the beginning. They would all say, that's a ridiculous question. We can't answer that question. So I said, what do you mean? What do you mean you can't answer the question? So they said, well, you just said someone with depression. What does that even mean? Depression is not a term that you could just throw around. There's a whole spectrum within depression. What are we talking about, right? When you go to a GP, they have 9 boxes they can tick, for what are the symptoms. You're talking about anhedonia. We're talking about lack of sleep. We're talking about suicidal ideation. What are we saying? How long? 1 year, 2 years, 2 months? How long has it been going? Has it been going on? What treatments? What's the history? Meaning, we need a whole host of details in order to know the answer to this. So basically, to make it short, what they told me was every case is different. So I said to myself, you know what? I don't have to write a book. I should just print a flyer that says every case is different and hand it out, in the middle of in the Times Square, wherever it is, So, and that would be enough. But I wanted to write a book, but what their answers showed me was it was going to be challenging. I couldn't just write, as you said before, like a response, or like one response about depression or about OCD or whatever, and just send it out. It would be different for every single person. And anyone who has experienced mental health challenges or knows what I'm talking about. It really is very, very different for every single person, and what every person needs is also different. So how did I write the book? The language of the book was very carefully crafted. It had to be something between something very generic, because if it's too generic, it's unhelpful, and not too specific, because then it's only helpful to that very specific case. What I aimed to do was to describe cases that are more basic, that happen more often, shall we say, and cover, let's say, 70 or 80% of cases through that case, and give guidance in the footnotes as to how I thought about this and why I'm saying what I'm saying, so that people can then take that and apply it in other cases in other ways, right? But the language is carefully crafted. So the point is that really it's difficult to give sweeping responses and to say, this is true for everybody. But I think we can definitely say this is true for a lot of people, right? So if we talk about ERP, for example, with OCD, exposure and response prevention as a tool, CBT, right? We can definitely say CBT helps a lot of people. Will it help everybody? No, it won't help everybody, but it'll help a lot of people. So in the same way, I could say there are certain halachic responses that could help a lot of people, right? If it comes to Passover, for example, and cleanliness, you're absolutely right. I can generally say, here is the level of cleaning that you need to do. Don't go beyond this. For people with OCD, for sure, I would say, give them a very basic thing and say, just do this. Of course, it has to be clear cut. With OCD, if you leave any room for interpretation, right? For example, to say, just clean your refrigerator well. Like, that's terrible. Do not say that. Yeah. You have to give much greater clarity. You say, take a wipe, wipe once, and that's it, right? That's a better piece of advice for someone with OCD, right? So we can definitely give some sweeping generalizations that help everybody. Of course, we always need to remember every case will be different, and we will need, at the end of the day, to tweak it according to the specific person.
I think even people who don't suffer mental distress for OCD recognize that within themselves, that if they're preparing for Passover and they're told to do it well, then they catch themselves going well beyond what they thought they would do at the beginning of it. So I'm actually interested to see, hopefully the book will come out in English, that we'll see again what these ripple effects are, not just for those who have formal diagnoses, but what it does for the mental well-being of people and appreciating the spectrum of mental well-being. So that will be interesting.
That will be, yes.
Could you give me an example of when Jewish law may actually help someone who is mentally suffering?
Yeah, Absolutely. I think people need to understand something very, very important about Jewish law, and it actually connects to your first question when you asked me about to explain about Jewish law and what it is, right? So think about this: like, would you want to not be a nation of laws? No, you wouldn't, right? You're happy that you're a nation of laws, that you have a Supreme Court, that you have a system, right? The system helps. How does it help? Besides governing, the laws between people, right? It helps just to give a person a sense of order, of discipline, of grounding. It anchors a person within their society, within their culture. That's very, very important. Or even let's call them the unwritten laws, meaning the idea that that there's a certain code, shall we say, of politeness, of cordialness that people need to act and to have between each other. That's very, very significant. That's very, very important, and it helps us for our psychic balance. It helps us. So think about the same way with regards to Jewish law. It's the same thing. It's a fantastic framework if used properly. If used improperly, it could hurt, could harm. We've talked about that. But if used properly, it could be incredibly anchoring. I mean, people say that, right? What's the famous line that religion is opium for the masses? So on some level, whether or not you believe it is true. In other words, that it's incredibly helpful to people to believe, meaning that believing in a God, whether once again you can believe it exists, not exist, whatever. But either way, it is definitely helpful culturally for people many times to believe in God, to believe that there's a higher power, that there's a plan, that there's all these things, right? It is once again incredibly grounding, anchoring, helpful to get through difficult times. The system of law also is helpful in that way. And let me give you an example. So, people, let's say, go to Minyan every day. Minyan is like they go to shul, right, to the synagogue in order to pray with a quorum of 10 men at the very least. And then they can say things that they can't usually say at home when they're davening on their own, when they're praying on their own. So if a person comes to me and says, with my depression, do I need to go and pray in a minyan, in shul with a quorum? Is that necessary for me or not necessary? Now, I can tell you here, without going into the details, that from a Jewish law perspective, it's very easy to tell a person that they do not have to daven with a quorum. You don't have to pray with a quorum. It's very, very simple to say that from a halachic perspective. However, when I spoke to my colleague, Dr. Harris, who I wrote the book with, my friend, and I said to him, hey, so we can allow this, right? He said to me, you crazy? Why would we allow that? I said, what do you mean, why would we allow it? He says, behavioral activation. If someone is suffering from depression and, the therapist might want to activate them, to get them out of bed, to make them, do things, to make them, so to speak, operational, that would help, right? So he says, oh, you anyway have minyan in the morning? Great. Why don't you get up for minyan, go to minyan, etc. But then the guy will say, but the rabbi told me I don't have to. So, like I'm exempt, right? So here, the rabbi, if he doesn't know better, he's actually put an obstacle, to the therapy, because the therapist might very well want to use this framework that the person already has built into their lives of the halacha in order to help the person through their situation. So the bottom line from that story is that the religious framework has a tremendous potential to be grounding and anchoring for a person who is losing all of his grounding, all of his anchoring through his mental health challenge. And I think that if you speak to religious people, you'll find that that's very, very true for them.
Thank you. I think that something that I've struggled with depression is finding something outside of myself to compel me to do something. They do exist. They especially exist in other people. So it can be even in my work, between appointments, things can get a bit harder and being by myself. And as soon as I'm confronted with the obligation of someone else and providing support, then things can change very quickly. So to feel like you might be able to get more of that sense of obligation from outside yourself, to get out the house, feels like there's a great potential there.
Absolutely.
So I want to now talk about mental health and Judaism more broadly, beyond Jewish law, and thinking still about the religious aspects, maybe some of the cultural aspects, but they go beyond the letter of the law. Maybe, like you said, even the unwritten law, there are certain things that are there, and they're these broad brushstrokes that animate the community's culture. So with those unwritten laws seem to come a lot of expectations. Judaism and Jewish communities can often place great expectations on their members. And there are different types. There are moral expectations, intellectual ones, and maybe more nowadays, but maybe I'm romanticizing the past, professional and material expectations, professional status and material status. So how do we support those in our community who don't feel good enough, whether that be morally, intellectually, or in their professional material status? This feels connected.
Yeah. You're asking a tough question because look, it's not just the Jewish community, but it's also the Jewish community. We need to get better. We need to get better at helping people and making them feel at home, within their own community. And I want to explain the point here, because I know that stigma is a problem, like I said, in all communities. I'm quite certain of that. So I don't think we're special in that sense. But I do want to highlight a point in which we are special, which in this sense can work positively, but it could also work to our detriment. There's a concept we call chesed, right? Chesed, I assume that your listeners know what that is, but it's translated usually as loving kindness. These are acts that you do for other people. And the Jewish community is a champion of chesed. Seriously. They have, there's something called a gmach or gmilot chasadim, where basically, they sometimes store all kinds of things. They could store like wedding dresses, for brides who need a wedding dress, and it's all for free, or for a very small amount of money, or they will supply. Right, woman gives birth in the community, they'll supply her with, meals for a month. They'll take the kids to this and that and the other. Chesed is a never-ending project within the Jewish communities for hundreds and hundreds of years. For hundreds of years. We are champions at it because we've been doing it for so long. And every community throughout the generations has had basically its own internal structures in place, right, to help people, especially when we were persecuted, in other communities, by other communities. So certainly we needed our own internal structures to help each other. And like I said, we've been doing it for so many years, we're great at it. It's because we're so good at it that it's a double slap in the face when someone with mental health challenges doesn't get that support. In other words, when they see that someone with physical health issues, that they are noticed, that they are not transparent, that they are davened for in shul, they're prayed for, their name is uttered, right? In the announcements, they say such and such, is unwell or is sick, go and visit him, But anyone with a mental health concern is overlooked or goes completely unnoticed. That hurts twice as much in the Jewish community than it does in the general community. Because of that, because we're so good at it, because we know how to do it right, when it's not done for you, then it hurts. So therefore, we need to sophisticate our structures, our communal structures, to notice people and to notice what they're going through. And I know people tell me, but we don't know because they don't tell. And I always tell people it's a chicken and egg situation here. Yeah, they will tell when they feel that they will be received with the proper sophistication and sensitivity, and that's on us. We can't expect them to first come out and tell and risk being shot down or greeted in a way that is improper or inappropriate, or that people will say things to them that are inappropriate. We need to learn about that. Evenings like this are great, but to have more evenings with mental health professionals. I always say to communities that say to me, "What should we do first? What should we do first?" I would say, "Here's the thing to do: invite a psychologist or a social worker or someone who's in the mental health field, just to talk about how to talk. Because when you see someone with cancer, a lot of times you know what to ask. You know chemotherapy, you know the words, you know the lingo, chemotherapy, radiation, oncologist, right? Even though you're not a doctor, you have no training in physical health, and yet somehow you've managed to work out what to basically say in a conversation, right? When you encounter someone with depression, if it's awkward, if it's like this deafening silence, then the person feels awkward. Like I've now put the entire room into an awkward situation. So why put myself into that situation? People don't know. What am I supposed to ask? How is your depression going? Like people don't even know how to talk about it, what to say, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. That we should teach. Just the basics. You don't need any degree in order to be able to approach someone who is suffering from mental health challenges and to be able to talk to them like a normal person. So they don't feel weird, they don't feel strange, they don't feel like they did something wrong, like they're making everyone in the room uncomfortable, because then they won't want to come and they won't want to talk about it. That we really need to do within our communities.
I definitely agree. I think that would be a great baseline from which to go. I think that I'm interested in looking at individual aspects, like the moral aspect, like how we teach about morality or how we valorize the intellect. And I wonder if there's things that we can do in those individual areas as well. So I've noticed in my Jewish education that sometimes other people's exceptional qualities were valorized. So this Enlightenment rabbi needed very little sleep. And so in yeshiva, there are many of us trying to get as little sleep as possible.
Right.
Or the Vilna Gaon, who almost wasted no minutes of his life. What do you think about this phenomenon?
Fantastic. You're absolutely right. I'll tell you, that I'll tell you a story from my own past. Okay, when I went to yeshiva, right? So I went to learn. I was in yeshiva for 8 years, so I learned for quite a bit. And in the first year that I was in yeshiva, some of the guys were considered more serious, and some of the guys were considered less serious. There were a few guys that I looked at when I was, I'll be honest, I looked down at them. I thought, like I'm here, not 24/7, but I would spend a lot of time learning, and a lot of them were like, they'd go out, they'd miss an hour here, miss an hour there, and like, why? What's wrong? But they can't be more serious. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't lazy people in the world. There are, and some people just are indeed lazy, and they just they don't do the work that they can do. But looking back at it now, I say to myself, you know what? Maybe those guys were putting in more effort than me. Maybe it was hard for them to learn. Maybe it was difficult for them. And you know what? They said, even though it's difficult for me to go to yeshiva, I'm going to go. Even though it's difficult for me to learn and to sit in class for hours and hours and hours, you know what? I really want to go to yeshiva. I really want to make it happen. So I'm going to go, right? I'm not saying that houses of learning should forget about excellence, and not try to strive for that or achieve that. It's wonderful if there are people who can spend hours and hours and hours sitting and learning, and they don't need a break, and et cetera. Wonderful, yeah. But that doesn't mean that the only way to evaluate excellence or progress or achievement, is through the quantitative effect. There should be also a qualitative bar that a person, is measured by. And if the person is putting all they have into it, and that still falls short of what, someone who doesn't have those challenges achieves, so what? They put all into it. They put all of themselves into it. And that is significant. So I think that our yeshivas, for example, and our communities, right? You don't have to, once again, I'm not saying, oh, forget about intellectual achievement. That doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It matters, and we should encourage that. But we should encourage also a different kind of achievement where people are validated and valued for just showing up. Yes, sometimes for just showing up. That's not so bad. The Gemara itself says, Lefum tsa'ara agra, which translated means the reward is according to the distress, to the pain. What is this word? Is this?
Oh, no. Sorry, I said, oh no, go
Oh
on.
no, yes, oh no. What's that? What was it referring to? It was actually referring to there in Babylon, in Bavel, there was twice a year there was this like huge ingathering for like a talk that the big Rosh Hashiva used to give. So everyone used to come and hear the talk. And the thing is, there were no microphones. There was no way to amplify a person's voice. So basically, he would stand in the center and he would talk, and people in the back, like how much could they hear? You know what I'm saying? But they would still like cram in. They would cram in. It was crammed. It was all like very very tight in the room. People would cram in to hear snippets. And so what the Gemara is saying is something unbelievable. The Gemara is saying, you know what? It doesn't matter how much you heard. It doesn't matter how much you caught from that. You crammed in, you were in distress, you were like, oh, whatever. Yeah, that means something to us. The fact that you were willing to stand like that for an hour, and go through that just to hear the few snippets that you got in. Okay, you know what? Whatever. That's good enough. And I think that there's a standard here that we need to adopt. Once again, it doesn't mean to just lower the bar for everybody. No, everybody should do what they can. And if we can have people who are wonderful, but if the people can't achieve that, so what? We should have in every school, in every yeshiva, we should have a sensitivity to that fact and elevate those individuals who can achieve only so much, but give that the place that it deserves as well.
I think that I would be better off today if my rabbis saw me learning at 1 a.m. and said, go to bed. That there was an appreciation that we're all on a bell curve. And this isn't just in the Jewish community. It's well known that Margaret Thatcher slept 4 hours a night. There's a Guinness World Record of a surgeon sleeping 2 hours and feeling fully refreshed and ready to go for a long time. But if Jewish educators and professionals can look at an enthusiastic group doing something that's stretching human limits, they can be guaranteed that there are some of them who are going to end up suffering for it. And I feel a sense that still needs to be appreciated. We can both value the people who can do that and also make space for the rest of the bell curve without feeling like it's any less.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's a huge challenge for us, and we really need to do that. I agree with you.
And so maybe my final question, which is related, and we've started it already, and then we have to go to questions. So maybe answer quickly, Rabbi Rosensweig, how can we raise a psychologically healthier future generation of Jews? A couple of points.
Yeah. So you're right. We already started talking about it. Raising awareness is paramount, right? These sorts of talks, are paramount. We need to continue doing that. We need to get into the schools. We need to get into the shuls. We need to get into the places where the community gets together and sensitize people, like I said, to the conversation, to the lingo, even to those simple things. That already goes a very long way. We need to make people feel comfortable to come to those places. Someone once told me, that they don't come to shul because they suffer from depression, and if they come to pray, they will inevitably start crying. And when they start crying, people don't know what to do with them, right? So there's this radius around them that no one wants to enter, because they don't know what to do. Why is he crying? What's going on? It's so. Why put everyone in that situation, right? So once again, they will prefer not to come and not to be in this awkward situation. But I had a person in my shul who fainted. They used the defibrillator on him. He had to go to the hospital. 2 weeks later, he was back in shul. Baruch Hashem, he was back on his feet, and he came. He didn't feel unwelcome or weird that he had fainted in shul. When it comes to something physical, many times people feel, okay, this happens. I'm back, right? But with mental health, it's like, wow, it's so weird, it's so strange. How are we gonna, know what to do with this, et cetera, et cetera. So once again, we have to make people feel welcome, to make people feel like it's their show, like they won't be, and no one will feel, unhappy to see them or weirded out or awkward. These are the kinds of things that we can do that can go a really, really long way.
Thank you so much. I'm now going to go to questions from those in the audience. And so we have first question that came in from Russell. Do you feel that you have inspired other rabbis to think differently about their own approach to mental health in their own communities?
Well,
you hope so. You hope so.
I hope so, yes. Well, first of all, in a very practical sense, the answer is yes, because I besides my book, I created a nonprofit called Maglei Nefesh, and you mentioned it at the beginning, I believe. And Maglei Nefesh, the first thing that we started doing was rabbinic training, and we've already trained, I would say, close to about 30 rabbis and about 22 rabbiniot, female rabbinic leaders, who in their communities have gone through our training, 50 hours of training, from in all kinds of areas. And in that sense, I think, yes, I think we've already, in a very practical sense, managed to affect the rabbinic world. But beyond that, I travel everywhere. I've been to Australia, I've been to the US, I've been to the UK, and God willing, very, very shortly, in a few months, I think we're going to start also a rabbinic program in the UK, training. So we're going to do that. But yes, I get calls from all over the world, really all over the world, and people really see the value in this sort of discussion. So I'm very happy to say that yes, I think that we are definitely inspiring communities and community leaders to do this sort of work, and to be sensitive, to this sort of challenge.
Thank you. Just out of interest, Maglei Nefesh. I know Maglei Tzedek, but I don't know Maglei Nefesh. How would you translate these terms? Right. So the one I used, please.
we translated it as circles of support. Okay. And the reason we translated it that way, besides the fact that I think it's accurate, but circles of support, because that we are talking about circles, meaning when people, this is actually an important point, even though it was just like a linguistic issue, but it's important. When people think mental health, they think, well, I know where someone with a mental health challenge goes. They go to the psych ward, they go to the therapist, everything happens between four walls, right? It happens between the four walls of the ward, or between the four walls of the therapist's office, and that's where it happens. But that's it. And one second, I think that there are other things over here. There are other circles that can support, a person, right? So even if they're hospitalized is one thing, but when they're in the community, right, the idea that we don't have anything to do with mental health. Mental health is for the mental health professionals. That's so not true. It's so wrong. And I always give the example. I say, imagine someone in a wheelchair. Okay, they were in an accident, wheelchair. Okay, who takes care of that person? So the physical therapist, occupational therapist, fine. It's true. Those are the professionals who take care of them. But if the person wanted to get into a movie theater, or into a house of worship, or into wherever, right? And if there's no ramp, who builds the ramp? The doctors, the hospitals, the professionals? No, the people who own the movie theater will have to build the ramp, right? In other words, there's so much for the community to do, the community, in order to help that person feel accepted and at home, and their dignity is being respected, right? There's a lot to do. We need to build ramps also with mental health. That's my point. And that only the community can do that. The community needs to understand where people are having trouble fitting in, or having trouble feeling comfortable and feeling like their dignity is restored, and there we need to build the, so to speak, ramps to make them feel comfortable. That's the circle of the community that's also supposed to support.
You're speaking to a peer support worker, so you're really speaking my language here. The idea of peer support is that there's a large part of support that can be done as a peer, not as an expert. And it's really interesting to think, both in the secular and in the Jewish worlds of mental health, about how we approach expertise. And sometimes it can be done to abrogate responsibility, and that actually there's a lot that we can do just by acts of loving kindness. So that really, it's a wonderful name. I'm glad I asked. Okay, we have another question that's come in. This person is describing their experience of Jewish education and being very worried about God punishing them. And they just were asking you to reflect on whether this is actually an area that we can review and change in some way. Maybe if I were to phrase it, is there a space for thinking about how we teach about reward and punishment that may benefit mental health?
Yeah. It's a much broader question than my field. I mean, I'm going to answer it, but I'm just saying I just want to explain. Actually, it's actually a much broader question than the specific field of mental health, because I think that even with no mental health challenges in the background, I think we have to think about how we're teaching about reward and punishment. So, I think it's a broad thing. But let me break it down in terms of. I think there's a difference. Look, people always. I don't know. Once again, how many people are familiar with this sort of speech? People always say within the Orthodox community, they will tell you, being Orthodox is hard. Being Orthodox is difficult. What's the like? I understand. It's difficult to get up in the morning and pray. Okay, it's fine, sir. It's difficult to do this, and it's difficult to keep Shabbat. It's difficult but that's how it is, and you have to, get yourself going and, find the strength and do it. Okay. There's a difference between something being difficult and suffering from that something. Okay. I agree that anything worth doing is difficult sometimes, etc. And Jewish law is definitely not always simple and not always easy. And yes, people will have to overextend themselves sometimes in order to keep Jewish law. There's a very big difference in saying that and saying that people have to suffer for Jewish law. So you'll say, oh, what do you mean fasting is not suffering? And the answer is no, it's not. I mean, people who can fast for 24, 25 hours, right? Yeah, they have a little bit of a background headache, fine. They're not lying in bed, half dead. I mean, that's not what we're talking about. Like, the people who can fast should fast, yeah? But the people who can't fast, if they're really, really suffering and really, really in distress, we should think about that, what's going on, right? In which situation do we allow it, which situation we don't allow it? It's not so simple, yeah? But the point is, it's definitely a question to ask. So, suffering is not a prerequisite for a religious life, but sometimes is put forwards in that way. And the same thing with reward and punishment. I don't think it's a bad message to say, look, the things that we do, we should take responsibility for them. They have consequences. And if you believe in spiritual consequences, then fine. There are also spiritual consequences, just like there are physical consequences for things you do in the physical world. I don't think there's anything wrong with that message, in and of itself. But if you say to the person, you start positing it as an ultimatum, or positing it as a threat to the person. If you do so and so and so, you'll burn in hell. If you do so and so and so, you'll be cut off, karet, from the Jewish people, et cetera, et cetera. If you start using that terminology, then I think it backfires in more ways than one. I'm not just talking about people saying, well, forget this, I don't want, which definitely happens. People can definitely just leave religion. But even if they stay within religion, now they're just traumatized by religion. Now they're just doing things because they're too scared, or they're doing things because every little thing that they're doing, they think, oh, it's going to land me in hell, or this or that or the other. That's not a way to live. It's not a way to live your Judaism. To have a sense of responsibility for your actions, that's positive. To have a sense of fear of every single thing that you're doing, that it's going to cause this or that or the other, that is just going to backfire completely on the religious consciousness. And we definitely need to know the difference between those two things and to teach it properly so that people love Judaism and don't hate it. And look, I always say it's like your parents. Hopefully, if the relationship is good with your parents, then you love them. But you also, I wouldn't say fear them, but you are in awe of them. Meaning they do a little bit scare you sometimes, and you're definitely wary. You don't want to get them angry. You don't want to do things that they're unhappy with. If they're displeased or disappointed, you're unhappy. You don't want to displease them, etc. That's not an unhealthy situation. It's not a bad thing. If you're afraid, if you're terrified of your parents, that's not a healthy thing. That's not a healthy situation. You shouldn't be terrified of your parents. You should feel comfortable with your parents, but you should also have a healthy sense of respect, towards your parents, and understand that they're older than you and they take care of you, and have all that, all those feelings which come together. You can love God, and you can also at the same time have a sense of respect. He commanded you without being terrified that he's going to punish you and kill you and do all kinds of things. That's less negative. That's less positive.
Yeah, when I found out that the phrase Yirat Shamayim could both be fear of heaven, but also awe of heaven, or Yirat Hashem, that word means both, and that actually awe was something that I could connect to more. And when you're in awe of someone and you want to be your best self for them, that feels very different from when you're quaking in your boots for the fear of the consequences. And personally, I found a lot of I was able to do a lot of work in shifting some of those messages around faith that left me feeling better in understanding my relationship with my Judaism, with God, and so on. I'm aware of the time. We do have one or two questions left. I think we won't be able to answer them, though. So I'm going to end. In order to do that, I'm just going to quickly share my screen and share some resources. The host disabled participant screen sharing. We probably did not think about that in advance. Okay. The resources will be shared in the chat. I will just read them out. If you need support or you are supporting someone who needs help, then visit jamiuk.org/get-support. I've actually just been made the host. Thank you very much. So now you can see what I'm seeing. Ideally, I'd make this full screen. No time, sorry. So visit jamiuk.org/get-support. Here you can see a sense of how valuable this website is. It will give you guidance on how to get emergency help. And all the way on the top right side, there are useful links as well. And this covers all things: Jewish-specific organizations, emergency listening, charities like the Samaritans, who will be there for you no matter what. There's a lot in that link alone, and it's worth going to, both for support that you need quickly and not. You can call us, Jami, on 0208-458-2223. We have teamed up with the national charity Shout, which is a text service. If you text Jami to 85258 to start it off, we'll know that you've been referred through us, but that's always available and immediately. We have online counseling for adults via Quell, and we have for young people Kuth as well. And online you'll also find much more, but our website is a great place to start. And with that, with being 1 minute over, Rabbi Yoni, thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation. We had also amongst the questions some comments of appreciation for the fact that these sorts of discussions are happening and that people feel energized and seen. And so I'm really glad that that's a result of Mental Health Awareness Shabbat. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all to everyone who came and listened to us. And please, Mental Health Awareness Shabbat should continue. We're only in our 6th year, and it takes a century to build an institution like this. So be a part of it. Get involved with your local synagogue, your shul, other Jewish organizations, and we will build a much more mentally aware community together. So thank you all for coming.